They called it retirement, but let's not pretend. It was a polite exit, one wrapped in HR language and phony smiles, designed to push me out without the decency of calling it what it was, a firing. My name is Douglas Rains. I'm 58 years old, and for the last 24 years, I was the senior client relations strategist at a national software consultancy based in Denver. I didn't have a fancy title when I started, just a cheap desk, a landline, and a mandate to keep the big clients happy. And I did. Through acquisitions, leadership changes, and economic nosedives, I kept the same 5 enterprise clients on board, clients that made up 42% of our annual recurring revenue. I didn't just manage their accounts. I built relationships, earned trust, and fixed messes quietly when younger execs overpromised. I was the calm during contract storms, the guy the clients actually remembered. And just like that, they wanted me gone. The meeting happened on a Wednesday. 2 senior VPs, a woman from HR I barely knew, and a yellow envelope. The kind you recognize before it even lands on the table. They used words like legacy, time to pass the torch, and a generous transition plan. They smiled a lot. That robotic kind of smile you learn to read as insincerity the older you get. I didn't argue, didn't make a scene. I just sat there, nodded slowly, and asked one question. Who's taking over my portfolio? They blinked. One VP looked at the other. Well, we have a younger team stepping in. Cross-functional support, he said. Translation? No one. They had no clue how this job actually worked. I signed the papers that afternoon. Took the offer. Better than fighting. They gave me 90 days of transition time, though I knew they'd want me gone sooner. That's how these things go. They'll escort you out with a cupcake and a branded mug, then replace you with someone fresh out of grad school who's never even spoken to a VP at a Fortune 500 company. At home, my wife smiled gently and told me I'd earned the rest. But I wasn't tired. I wasn't ready to rest, and I sure as hell didn't feel retired. The next morning I cleared out my desk. I didn't wait for some forced farewell or awkward cupcakes in the break room. I packed everything methodically. Old meeting notebooks, a framed photo from a company retreat no one remembered anymore, and a thumb drive I'd kept in my drawer for years. Not for secrets or leverage, just muscle memory. As I stood there in my half-empty office, I heard laughter from down the hall. A group of junior associates hovered around the coffee machine, excitedly talking about landing the Peterson account. Peterson had been my account since 2007. I'd gotten their CIO to switch from Oracle, sat through 6-hour dinners with them, helped the VP's daughter get her internship through our HR, and now that same account was being casually tossed around like a football, like legacy didn't mean anything unless it showed up on Slack. I didn't interrupt, just kept listening. One of the new hires, a loud guy in his 20s, joked, "Well, I guess it's our turn now." I turned and shut the door behind me. Quietly. When I first started at the company, we didn't have client dashboards or Salesforce integrations. Everything was handwritten, logged into spreadsheets, and backed up on dusty CDs. It was inefficient, but I knew what each client needed. When to call, when to wait, what they feared. One time I stopped $1 million account from walking just by sending flowers after a CIO's mother passed. Not because anyone told me. Because I paid attention. Because people trusted me. Now management wanted to modernize. They didn't see what got lost in translation. What stung most wasn't the exit itself. It was how easily they acted like I was replaceable. Like 24 years could be plugged into a PowerPoint and delegated across a team of dynamic collaborators. They didn't ask for a download of my contacts, didn't shadow me on calls. They just assumed it would all fall into place. And as I handed in my access badge, I realized something chilling. They hadn't revoked my credentials yet. Most people thought my job was just client management, a polite phrase for babysitting accounts. But what they never understood was how much of the business depended on institutional memory. And that memory lived in me. When a client panicked because the new onboarding doc referenced the wrong SLA, I fixed it in real time because I remembered the negotiation 6 years ago where they insisted on a specific clause. When a Fortune 100 account threatened to walk due to a billing error, I knew which operations manager to call and which to avoid. There was no handover doc that could replicate that, No wiki page that could simulate what 2 decades of phone calls and boardroom banter taught me. And most importantly, I was the one who helped set up the client tracking system they still use to this day, with layered permissions, manual overrides, and back-end auditing that no one outside of my team fully understood. The thing is, no one bothered to ask me how any of it worked. Not once during the offboarding did anyone request credentials. They assumed IT would take care of it. They were wrong. Years ago, I'd built a secondary account under my name, not for malicious intent, but for safety. A system redundancy. It wasn't even hidden, just something no one thought to look for because no one ever asked questions about how client escalation logs got filtered. It was tied to my personal email, approved by my then CTO, and had enough permissions to view, and in some cases flag, internal changes to client records. By the time they let me go, I hadn't touched that account in months, but now I logged back in. Everything was still there. Each client's history, chat transcripts, escalation chains, back-end call logs, even new memos, sloppily written, about how to manage high-priority accounts post-Doug. And it was laughable. They'd created a task force of 6 junior reps and 1 overworked manager to replace me. They'd split my portfolio into a Kanban board, assigning pieces of client trust to people who didn't even know what half the acronyms meant. Worse, they'd downgraded several clients to a Tier 2 support level without telling them. That's the kind of thing that doesn't blow up overnight. But when it does, it really does. I wasn't bitter, not exactly, but I wasn't neutral either. Watching people who once smiled at you during birthday lunches now pick apart your legacy like vultures does something to a man. They hadn't just let me go. They'd erased my presence without reverence. So I did what I do best. I monitored. Quietly. Every week I logged in, read the notes, tracked the changes, watched as the system I helped build got stretched beyond what it was designed for. They didn't even realize client escalations were stacking, because the new team hadn't set up proper alert thresholds. They missed 5 renewals in the first month. 2 clients flagged unresolved issues in the CRM for over 3 weeks. One of the clients, the biggest one, asked for Doug in an email thread. No one replied. I wasn't going to intervene, not yet, but I wasn't going to forget either. They thought they could replace the man who built the client retention model with a Trello board and a few shiny dashboards. But relationships don't live on dashboards. They live in nuance, in knowing when to make the call instead of sending the email, in picking up that a client's short reply means someone up top is upset, and fixing it before it spirals. That was the real legacy, and it wasn't theirs to ruin. I'd spent 24 years learning how to steer ships through fog. Now they were driving blind, and the fog was thickening fast. The first sign wasn't loud. It came buried in an automated report, the kind no one reads unless something goes wrong. It was a discrepancy in the Q2 client feedback summary. 1 line. Client escalation response time exceeded SLA for 3 consecutive weeks. That's a red flag. A big one. But it was also passive, vague, something a busy exec might glance over and assume would resolve itself. I saw it in the logs from my backdoor account. Saw that the issue had been marked under review. And then nothing. No follow-up. No owner assigned. Just silence. Meanwhile, the same client, a cybersecurity firm worth nearly $6 million in annual recurring revenue, had pinged support twice. Both messages were logged. Both were marked resolved, even though no one had responded. I didn't intervene, but I added the client's name to a personal list. That list would grow. By the end of the week, there were 4 major clients on it, all with delayed responses, all with tickets marked closed without resolution. And no one at the top seemed to notice. That's when I realized. The system wasn't just under strain. It was breaking. A few days later, I saw something that made me sit up in my chair. An internal memo, short, terse, probably written in a rush, Medit said, "Client dissatisfaction has increased by 17% month over month. Begin prepping retention strategy, doc." There was no mention of why, no breakdown, just a reaction. The kind of memo you write when you feel pressure but haven't connected the dots. But I had the dots, and I could see the line they formed. In trying to replace me with a piecemeal, agile team, they'd created a black hole of accountability. No one was checking the right reports. No one was triangulating support issues with contract renewal windows. And worst of all, They were still bragging in their investor updates about record low churn. That stat hadn't caught up with reality, but it would, soon. I began compiling my own report, not out of revenge, out of reflex. Old habits die hard, and I'd always been the one who sent the red alert emails when I saw patterns forming. This time, though, the report wasn't going to my boss. It was going into a personal folder labeled Post-Exit Observations. Inside were client names, missed ticket escalations, mismatched SLAs, and logs of key decision-makers asking questions that went unanswered. I had screenshots, audit trails, message timestamps. Every breadcrumb the new team left behind was now a thread in a bigger rope, one they were accidentally wrapping around their own necks. And still, they kept smiling on LinkedIn. Thrilled to be stepping into new client success leadership, one of them wrote. I knew the guy. He once asked me if SLA meant software licensing agreement. And now he was leading client ops. It all came to a head with the Hargrove account. Hargrove was our golden goose, a healthcare SaaS company with a prickly legal team and a brutal procurement process. I'd earned their trust after a compliance breach in 2019. Held their hand through 2 transitions, knew their renewal cycles down to the day. So when I saw an entry in the CRM titled Hargrove, Urgent Renewal Block, I opened it immediately. And what I found was chaos. The new rep had sent them the wrong contract. Not just outdated, legally invalid. It lacked the HIPAA clause we'd fought to get included. Hargrove responded once, then went silent. The internal chatter was panicked. You could see it in the timestamps. Messages flying at midnight, Slack threads with question mark in them. But no one contacted the legal team. And no one thought to call me. Not that they could anymore. That was when I knew this wasn't salvageable. I wasn't just watching a mess unfold. I was watching a slow-motion implosion. And here's the thing about watching a building collapse. You can't stop it, but you can document every crack, every snap, every puff of dust. And I was documenting all of it. Because when the reckoning came, when the board started asking questions or a client threatened legal action, someone would need to show the chain of failure. And this time, for once, I'd be ready. It was a Friday morning when my phone rang. Not my work number, my personal one. I didn't recognize the caller ID at first. The number was unfamiliar. But something about the area code felt important. I let it ring once more before answering. Doug Raines speaking, I said, defaulting to the old habit even though I technically no longer represented the company. There was a pause on the other end. Then, Doug, this is Christina Webb, from Hargrove. That name. It hit like a shot of cold air. Christina wasn't just anyone. She was Hargrove's head of vendor risk. The same woman who once tore into me over a misaligned delivery schedule. Sharp, unforgiving, but also fair. And now she was calling me. Not the company. Not her new point of contact. Me. I didn't know if this number still worked, she said. I had to dig it out of an old email thread. It works, I replied. Then she got right to it. We're considering pulling the plug. She didn't need to say more. I already knew. Christina outlined what I'd already seen brewing in the system. The botched renewal, the lack of follow-up, the legal holes. But hearing it from her made it feel real in a different way. She wasn't just venting. She was documenting, building her own case. They keep sending us canned responses, she said. No one on their side knows our history. One guy forwarded me a new client onboarding form. We've been with you for 8 years. I tried to offer sympathy without stepping over the line. I was no longer affiliated. I had to be careful. But she wasn't looking for apologies. She wanted answers. I don't expect you to fix this, she said. But I had to ask, is this how they're handling everything now? I paused, then gave her the only honest response I could. It's not how we used to handle things. Another pause, then she said, that's what I was afraid of. We ended the call professionally, cordially, but the subtext lingered. If Hargrove walked, it wouldn't just be a loss. It would be a signal to every other client that something was deeply broken. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a few minutes, not out of shock, out of calculation. That call had changed the game. Until now I was just an observer, a former employee watching things unravel. But now a client had come to me. one of the biggest, one with teeth, and they had receipts. That's when I decided the file I was compiling, it wouldn't just sit in a folder, it needed to move, not as revenge, as closure. They'd tried to retire me, strip me of relevance, but they forgot something important. Relevance isn't given, it's earned. And I'd earned every client, every system, every safeguard. They threw that away. Now they could reap what they'd sown. I went back through the logs with a new lens. This wasn't about errors anymore. It was about exposure. How many SLA violations had they covered up? How many auto-closed tickets had no real resolution? How many internal audit flags had been ignored by the junior team now managing relationships? I found 13. 13 instances in 60 days that, if examined by an external auditor, would scream gross negligence, not fraud, not malicious, but sloppy. And in the world of enterprise SaaS, sloppy is all it takes, especially when you're dealing with health tech clients like Hargrove. HIPAA alone was a minefield, and they were skipping across it with blindfolds on. That weekend, I built the report. Not a messy email chain, not a collection of screenshots, a proper deck, slides, data trails. Screenshots with annotations, escalation timelines, and at the end, a timeline of events, showing exactly when I left, and how quickly things spiraled. I didn't send it. Not yet. I needed one more thing, one more spark to ensure this wouldn't be swept under the rug. That spark came Monday morning. It started with a message in a Slack channel I wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. A junior analyst posted, "Anyone know why the Hargrove renewal disappeared from the Q3 pipeline?" Simple question. Innocent even. But the response thread beneath it revealed the iceberg. A senior account rep replied, "I think it got delayed." Then someone else chimed in, "Pretty sure it's marked churn now." And finally, from the head of sales, "Wait, we lost Hargrove?" The panic set in quickly. Threads spun off, DMs flurried, and I watched it all. From my quiet little login, the one they never remembered to remove. Within an hour, they knew. The Hargrove account, in nearly $6 million a year, had sent their termination letter over the weekend. Legal was pinged. Finance tried to stop the bleed, but it was too late. The letter was final. They were walking. And worst of all, they cited unacceptable transition management and disregard for previously agreed SLA terms. That wasn't just a client complaint. That was a legal liability. The ripple effect was immediate. Investors were looped in. The board started asking questions. How had the biggest account been allowed to lapse? Who was managing the transition? Had anyone flagged the early warning signs? I saw them scramble. Saw them start combing through chat logs, email threads, Jira tickets. But those only told half the story. The real story, the one they'd ignored, lived in back-end logs and escalation queues they never knew how to read. And that's where I came in. I didn't send the report immediately. I waited for the company-wide meeting. It was called in a hurry. One of those camera-on attendance mandatory calls. I wasn't invited, of course, but I knew exactly what would be said. Damage control, PR spin, learning moment. And that's when I sent it. Not to the leadership, not to legal, to the board. The fallout from Hargrove's departure didn't just cause chaos, it created a black hole. Everyone, from junior staff to executive leadership, got pulled into its gravitational field. I watched as internal audit meetings were scheduled on the fly, compliance officers got looped in on Slack threads they'd never touched before, and managers tried desperately to find someone, anyone, to blame. It was revealing. The company didn't respond with strategy, it responded with panic. They weren't trying to fix anything, they were trying to survive the week. I saw them pull up tickets I had personally tagged months earlier. Warnings about capacity stress points, legacy patching conflicts, redundant failover pathways they'd decided to sunset, all flagged, all ignored. And now those same blind spots were being dissected in live meetings by people who still didn't understand what they were looking at. One line in the notes from a Zoom call stood out. "Why didn't anyone escalate this sooner?" That one made me laugh. Escalate. I was the escalation path. And when they offboarded me, or rather forgot to, they also dismantled the last layer of proactive response they had. They didn't just fire an engineer. They fired the guy who knew where the fires would start, and now they were burning, live on Slack. Even the CTO, who had once told me to trust the process, had gone quiet. No morning messages, no Friday memes, just long absences and one-word replies. Then came the Hargrove email leak, not to the press, to a partner firm, a huge one. The message was polite but damning. Due to concerns about systemic instability and the loss of key personnel, we're evaluating continuity risk on all active vendors. We recommend caution. That was enough. The partner firm pulled out of a joint product launch just 2 weeks before rollout. Revenue projections tanked, investor calls were moved up, and still no one thought to reach out to me, not to apologize, not to ask for help, not even to check if I'd seen what was happening. They thought I was out of the game, done, invisible, but I was never gone. The message was short. Subject: Post-Exit Systems Observation Report, time sensitive. Body: Attached is a comprehensive breakdown of client management system failures observed following my departure. All data obtained via existing admin access still active due to incomplete offboarding. I trust this will clarify why Hargrove walked, and what else may be at risk. Attached: a 22-slide deck with audit trails, date stamp logs, and SLA charts. I didn't expect a response, not right away, but I got one. 2 hours later. A board member replied, "Thank you. This will be reviewed immediately." Then silence. By the next morning, the company was in lockdown mode. All admin accounts were audited. Offboarding protocols were rewritten. Legal started running internal interviews. People were placed on performance review. 3 managers were quietly reassigned. And in the next earnings call, the CEO didn't smile. He talked about unexpected churn and internal process restructuring. Never said my name, never would. But I saw the signs, the paper trail, the LinkedIn updates. They forced me into early retirement. But I walked out with something better than a severance package. I walked out with the truth. And when they thought no one was watching, I let the system speak for me. I didn't check my email for a few days after sending the report. Not because I was nervous, because I wasn't in a hurry. I had done what I needed to do. The report was thorough, measured, professional. And now, I had peace. The kind I hadn't felt since the day they told me I was being phased out. Not fired, not laid off. Just restructured into legacy transition. Their words, not mine. I spent those days walking, real walks. Not loops around the office floor pretending to stretch. I hiked. Took my time through the woods near my house. Listened to wind, not Slack pings. Smelled pine, not stale break room coffee. I thought about all the times I stayed late patching systems no one else understood. All the weekends I answered emergency calls because no one else could explain the alert logs. All the thank you emails I saved in a folder titled Respect. They'd thought I was just the guy who built the firewall, but I'd also built their trust, and they burned it. Now they were the ones behind the wall, and this time I wasn't letting them back in. About a week later, I got another message, this time from someone I didn't expect. A former junior engineer, Jaya, someone I'd mentored years ago. She'd gone to another firm, started fresh. Her message was simple. I saw what happened. Just wanted to say thank you for teaching me how to do things right. We're hiring if you're interested. That message meant more than the board's reply. It wasn't about getting even. It was about knowing I hadn't wasted those 22 years. Someone noticed, someone remembered, and someone learned. I didn't take her up on the offer, not because it wasn't tempting. It was. But because for the first time I wanted to build something for myself. No shareholders, no politics, no masked disrespect wrapped in branded jargon. I started sketching a consulting idea, one built around integrity audits, real ones or not checkbox slideshows. I had the blueprint, had the connections, and thanks to how sloppily they'd offboarded me, I had a reminder of just how needed that kind of work still was. I reached out to a few old colleagues, quietly, just to see if they were open to contract work. They were. Turns out a lot of people were waiting for someone to make the first move. They just didn't want to be the first one to risk their job. But me? They'd already pushed me out. So I had nothing left to lose, and that made me powerful. There was one last moment of closure, a news article, small blurb buried in a trade magazine. Former CIO steps down amid internal restructuring at ProSync Solutions. No mention of the Hargrove fallout. No reference to the audit trail, but I knew. That one sentence said it all. I didn't smile, didn't toast or gloat. Just closed the tab, breathed in, and kept writing. Not code, not policy, a proposal. For a company of one. Just me. Building again. But this time the walls were mine, and the access, mine to revoke.